Hey guys, what's up and welcome back. Wanted to make a video here as we approach the start date of Season 4, the Loot Reborn season, where the way in which itemization in Diablo 4 is going to change, and it's basically going to obsolete our gear and obsolete our build here. So this is basically our farewell to our launch version of the Barbarian here in the Eternal Realm. And what I want to do is talk through the gearing that we've done following the maxroll guide for the Whirlwind Endgame Barbarian build. And we'll just talk about some of the adjustments that we made. Before we get too far into the individual items, I just want to say how the build is scaled, and it's basically scaled off of damage while berserking, enabled by the Blood Rage node on the Paragon board. It's scaled off of Max Fury with the Ramaladini's Magnum Opus, and then all of the different snapshots for Edge Masters and Limitless Rage, right? So that's the Max Fury multipliers is the multiplier you get from Ramaladini's, the 1.4 from Edge Masters, and the 1.6 from Limitless Rage. We had to drop the 1.3 from Expectant to fit in Tybalt's Will, which is our last big scaler, which is now based on Unstoppable. And this is the new wrinkle to the build. This is why Tybalt's Will is the final piece of the puzzle, because it basically is encouraging you to have as many sources of Unstoppable as possible. And then the synergy piece here is Charge, which Charge gives you Unstoppable by default. And then with the passive Battle Fever, whenever a brawling skill deals damage to one enemy, gain Berserking for 3 seconds. So what that means is, if you think about how our bar is set up, what we're looking for is Berserking, Unstoppable, and Max Fury, right? And our skills are set up in a way to give us all three of those things. So if I look at Rallying Cry gives me Unstoppable, plus 20 Fury, plus movement speed, plus a whole bunch of Fury generation. And then Rallying Cry gives me Berserking, and then also gives me some additional Berserking generation through Prolific Fury, and then also damage reduction with aggressive resistance. So you can see all the Berserking synergies there, right? And then in addition to the 20 Fury that Rallying Cry generates with its modifier, it's also going to give us 50 Fury from Tybalt's Will. So that's 50 plus 20, that's 70 Fury when you hit the button, plus Echoing Fury is going to give us 10 Fury per second while a shout is active, right? So on our spreadsheet, right, we've got all these different sources of resource generation listed out, right? So over here, we've got our resource generation, and that can be on the rings, and then there could be other sources, but this is what I'm aware of. It might be on Amulet as well. But between the two rings, we have slots for resource generation there. Rallying Cry, which gives 40... Oops, excuse me. Rallying Cry, which gives 40 by default, plus 4 per additional rank. Tactical Rallying Cry gives another 20. This is resource generation percent. Prolific Fury gives 18, and Wrath of the Berserker gives 30, right? So they don't seem to just add up. They seem to multiply. So if I go over to the utility stats and I look at my 35.8, well, that should be from rings. And that's 16.2 and 16.9. So 16.2 and 16.9 added up, that would be 33.1. So I don't think they necessarily add. I'm not sure what the correct math calculation for that should be, but I can test just by hitting the buttons, right? So if I hit my 2 shouts, okay, 175.7, and then if I add the Wrath of the Berserker, I'm at 258.3. So yeah, on my spreadsheet, if I just add everything up, it shows as 145, but the number I'm getting in the tooltip is 258.3. Right? So what that would mean is basically lunging strike, that fury generated might already be impacted by the stat already, the 35.8 on that lunging strike. But basically what you're thinking is, okay, all of my fury sources are being multiplied by 258.3% if I have everything up, and then if I have just rallying cry and war cry up, which is what I'm going to have most of the time, that's 175.7. So already my fury meter's building, and then when I attack, I built up my fortify meter as well, right? So the important thing here is kind of twofold, right? One is weapon swaps with mortal draw, which is one reason that we want lunging strike. The other is everything on my bar serves a purpose, right? So the two shouts, like I just discussed, give unstoppable and berserking. Charge also gives unstoppable and berserking, but you got to hit. I don't know why it's so easy for charge to miss. And then Wrath of the Berserker gives everything. It gives berserking, it gives unstoppable. We can extend berserking with our basic attack. When we spend 50 fury, we get bonus damage 25% at a time, up to 100%. So that's a 2x multiplier. And then when Wrath of the Berserker is active, we get 20% increased movement speed and 30% fury generation. So Wrath of the Berserker is basically doing everything for this build. And then if we think about Unconstrained, right? Unconstrained takes Berserking's built-in bonus, which is 1.5, and takes it up to a 2x, right? So normally Berserking gives you 50% increased damage, or grants 25% increased damage and 15% movement speed. This takes that 25 and takes it to 100%, right? So that's how we have to interpret all of that. Warcry by default would give 15% moving speed, 25% increased damage from berserking, plus another 15% increased damage from Warcry, and then you can have that other modifier where it gives an extra 10% if there's enemies close, and then it gives you the, obviously berserking, right? So basically our rotation for any of these skills is going to be like Wrath of the Berserker, for example. Wrath of the Berserker, attack a few times. We're trying to build up our Fortify generation, and we can see that wasn't really efficient Fortify generation built up with just Wrath of the Berserker active. So what we're looking for in our rotation is going back to this idea of, okay, should we start out with as much resource generation as possible? And the answer to that would be going Rallying Cry plus Wrath of the Berserker, and then either hit with Charge or with Lunging Strike, and then into Whirlwind, right? So, and then extend the duration of Berserking with a Rallying Cry or War Cry. So realistically, what we could do is maybe a full pop is pop the shouts, pop Wrath of the Berserker, hit with Charge, and then, yeah, do we need Charge? I'm going to say pop the buffs, Lunging Strike, and then attack, and we want to see how long it takes to fill up. We basically want to instantly fill up our Fortify gauge, and that might be what we need to do. So we're going to try all 3 buffs plus 1 Lunging Strike and see if that gets us to Fortified. While we're waiting for our max Fury to go down, we have 213 Fury there. And then also in the spreadsheet, I've listed all of the sources of Fury. So 100 baseline, 28 each from the 2 rare nodes with their supporting magic nodes on the Warbringer board. Tempered Fury, which is, it would cost 3 skill points to get 9 Fury from Tempered Fury, so it's not worth it. And then you can get up to 14 each on the rings. This is highlighted in yellow because these are rolls. The Melted Heart is not a roll. But you have to roll on rings. On the Tusk Helm or a regular helm, you can roll up to 20. On Tybalt's Will, you can roll up to 20. It's listed as max resource rather than max fury, but it's the same thing. And then Rambaladini's is an interesting piece. It goes all the way up to 30 max fury after that was updated, so that's really cool. Okay, so our Fortify's at 0, our Fury's at 0. Let's hit all of our buffs and then attack one time and see what happens. Close. Close. It's close to giving us the max fortify. It's funny to me how charge doesn't always hit. I feel like we have to feather charge a little bit with the mouse to make sure that it connects. So that sound indicator was the Tusk Helm's ability activating. So that was, we already had Berserking, and then we struck the dummy, and that strike gave us Berserking again from the interaction between Charge and Battle Fever, right? So we had Berserking, and then we hit with Charge, and it gave us more Berserking, which activated the Tusk Helm's ability, which made us enraged, which deals 15% additional damage, gives us 2 Fury per second, and 10% CDR. So that's kind of like all the mechanics of the skill rotation. It's pretty simple to understand what's going on here. Basically, we buff, and then we do one attack into Whirlwind, whether that one attack is a charge or a lunging strike into Whirlwind, and then we just sequence our buffs in between, and we should basically always use one of the buffs. So we can use the shots together, lunging strike into Whirlwind, that's our standard opener, or if we're fighting a boss or something, we can either go all shouts plus Wrath of the Berserker, or Wrath of the Berserker first, followed by either charge or lunging strike into Whirlwind, and then kind of like refresh all of the bonuses by hitting the shouts, which won't interrupt the channeling. And then once all of our effects wear off, maybe we just reset with charge and then get back into spinning, right? So kind of like the movement from lunging strike and charge, and then the free movement while whirlwinding is all really nice. And then the buffs aren't just buffs for buff's sake. They're specifically chosen to be interacting with the effect of Tybalt's Will, which is a damage multiplier plus an additional burst of fury. And we really do need the burst of fury with how high our max fury has been scaling. And then, all right, let's talk about the gearing setup, right? So for gear, basically our standard setup, and this is very close, this is basically the maxroll setup verbatim. We've got the Tusk Helm, we've got the chest, and the defensive aspects of choice are Disobedience and Numbing Wrath on the maxroll article. So that's 2 defensive aspects, and we only have 2 places to put them, either the chest or the amulet. And what we chose to do was Disobedience and Juggernauts are interchangeable in the sense that they are aspects for armor, right? And what this chest is doing is with the armor percent plus the Juggernaut on here, plus just the fact that chests have the highest armor anyway for a base piece of equipment, we're at 14,000. We take this chest off, we're all the way at 4,000. So this one chest is basically representing 10,000 armor on it. So it's like our defensive chest. And then if we want to swap into speed farming, we can just put on Rage of Harrogath. We go under the 9,000 cap for level 100 monsters, but whatever. We don't need that much defense when we're speed farming. And then if we're pushing or doing PvP, we can put on the defensive chest. And then that freed up Numbing Wrath to move over to the necklace. We've got a max roll Numbing Wrath at 62, which is from a 925 pair of pants. And the only question is this enough source of Fortify? This is the only source of Fortify, and do we want the Warbringer legendary node, which gives us Fortify when spending Fury, right? Gloves is straightforward, just Relentless Berserkers, 40%. Tybalt's Will, we explained how these pants work a little bit. They give you the 1.4 multiplier at max roll when you become unstoppable. We have 3 different effects to become unstoppable. We have the shouts, we have charge, and we have Wrath of the Berserker. All 3 of those effects will give us unstoppable, so we'll activate Tybalt's Will. And basically, we just want to keep Tybalt's Will activation up. That's what the gameplay loop has become. It's switched from 3 basic attacks to generate expectant stacks, and then whirlwinding into any combination of get an unstoppable effect with berserking, and then start attacking with whirlwind. And then boots, this is just like utility boots. I like evade charges. Evade charges offset the Juggernaut penalty to evade. And then these are just double movement speed boots with Ghost Walkers. Ghost Walkers interacts with Unstoppable, so it's giving us more movement speed and free movement for our 3 different Unstoppable buttons. So that's cool. And then we also have Resistance Boots. If we want to push higher tier content, we need to get a better Ghost Walkers for this. And this pair of boots isn't ideal, but basically we're looking for boots with evade charge, movement speed, and 3 ideal resistances, hopefully all rolled to 60%. Rings are straightforward. We just have Echoing Fury, max roll at 10. Bold Chieftains, max rolled at 1.9. Both of these rings are CSC, max life, max fury resource generation. All of our weapons are all stats, strength, damage while berserking, and an additive. So in this case, damage to close. In this case, critical strike damage. And in this case, core skill damage. And then Romuladini's has some additive as well. Damage with dual wield, damage to close. And then it's got a lucky hit chance for getting primary resource. So that's all of the items. On Amulet, we've got movement speed, CDR, damage reduction, and ranks of defensive skills. That boosts our resource generation with Rallying Cry, and that would also boost our damage reduction with Challenging Shout if we were using Challenging Shout. Expertise is Two-Handed Sword for the bleeding synergy. It's the only source of bleeding. And then for our dual wield setup for our Whirlwind, we get a lucky hit chance to stun on this. And then we get a lucky hit chance, or killing a CC'd enemy. It's not a lucky hit, but killing a CC'd lucky hit to gain 5 fury. So yeah, this is giving like 10% increased damage to stun plus lucky hit chance get berserking. And this is giving a lucky hit chance for 5 fury. And then the attack speed is irrelevant there. And then in terms of the skill tree setup, we made one adjustment, which is since we want to play with Lunging Strike, we put Combat Lunging Strike back on here. That will give Lunging Strike a chance to get berserking, which goes really well with the Horned Helm. And then we took 1 point out of Challenging Shout because A, we don't have it equipped, and B, we have free ranks in Challenging Shout from the amulet anyway. And then we took a couple of points out of Raid Leader and redistributed them into Guttural Yell and Booming Voice to max those out. We had to take 1 point out of Aggressive Resistance to do that, but this is already at 20% with the additional ranks from the Tusk Helm, so that's fine. And then everything else is straight out of the max roll page. We've got Wallop and Concussion, which for me would be the first things I would drop if we needed more defense. So if we need more defense, we can get Invigorating Fury for heals. We can get Defensive Stance for DR while fortified. We can get Raid Leader for more heals. And we would basically just pull out 6 points out of Concussion and Wallop. And then we would need like 10 points to redistribute. I don't know exactly where we would get them, but I had my previous build was kind of set up like that with all of the defensive options, and it didn't have, so it didn't have Battle Fever or Charge. So it would save 6 points here, and it would save 6 points here. That would be 12 to redistribute, but since we have Tybalt's Will, we're going to try and make the most out of the Charge gameplay. If you wanted to be super duper defensive and you still wanted a source of Unstoppable, you could go with Iron Skin instead, and then put on the Iron Warrior aspect, and that would make it so that you could have Iron Skin give Barrier, Unstoppable, damage reduction, and then that just makes the barrier bigger, and then this also gives heals. So like Iron Skin could be Barrier, Unstoppable, damage reduction, and healing. So if you need a lot more damage mitigation, bringing Iron Skin back into the mix is an option. As far as the Paragon board's concerned, we just copy and pasted directly out of maxroll. The only thing that we changed is we plucked one magic node of armor and swapped that out for Fury on Kill, because the Fury on Kill is pretty important. But what I would say is if we wanted to do some adjustments, we could kind of pull out of some of these additive damage category type things. Like sometimes we need them to activate the glyph, so like we need these dexes anyway to activate this glyph, but in general what we should do is have glyphs kind of like at minimum stats, right? So we don't need this extra mortal draw additive damage category damage at all, the 118. It doesn't matter what that is. So like one thing we could do is probably like pull out like that and then put in like that, right? So we've got 25 dex, but now we have some additional resistance, right? So making little adjustments like that is what I like to do, or like pulling out of armor, which we don't need because we hit the cap with our chest, and getting more utility stuff like the max life or the fury on kill, right? To me, that's higher priority. And I would love to be able to get either Flawless Technique for additional critical strike chance or Warbringer for the additional Fortify, right? So the last thing I'll talk about from a spreadsheet perspective is basically just the types of scaling that I'm talking about. So for Whirlwind, we have critical strike chance, which it's important to get as high as possible. Due to all of the different changes to the setup we have to make, we kind of have to stick Dire Whirlwind on the one-handed, which means our max critical strike chance is at 86%, which is why we would be interested in potentially swapping in the Wrath Glyph for Blood Feeder, and then see if we can get the Flawless Technique Legendary Node, because that would take us back up to 100%, and then we would be exploring essentially every source of critical strike chance, with the exception of No Mercy. And No Mercy would be fine if we also had like slow synergies to go with our stun synergies, right? And then lastly, for Max Fury, I don't know if I talked about this yet, but for Max Fury, this goes all the way up to 263 if you include the 9 Fury from Tempered Fury. That 9 Fury isn't worth 3 skill points, but it goes all the way up to 263, 254 minus Tempered Fury, and then you can get another 60 on the Melted Heart. And that's what your Ramaladini's Magnum Opus scaling is based off of. So yeah, lastly, just saying the obvious, right? So we're scaling off of damage while berserking. We've got that where we can on the 3 weapons and on the helm. And then if we wanted to swap something out on rings, we could swap max life out for more damage while berserking. And then our multipliers, Limitless Rage, Edge Masters, and the Ramaladini's Unique Aspect, they're all looking for you to have maximum fury. Numbing Wrath, which gives us Fortify, is also looking for us to max out the fury. And then we can also get additional counteroffensive, gives us additional damage multiplier when we're fortified. And then Tybalt's Will is giving us a 1.4 multiplier. The Tusk Helm is giving us a small 1.15 multiplier. And then a couple of different places have damage with stun, damage multipliers to stunned enemies, the one-handed mace expertise, and then the wallop passive. And then the one-handed mace can stun enemies, and then the concussion passive can stun enemies as well. And then same, I believe, charge stuns them if we hit them into a wall, right? So our charge with the two-handed mace and our whirlwind with the one-handed mace, those all have different ways of stunning, and then we have small multipliers to damage while stunned. And if we had to switch from offensive focus to defensive focus, we would just drop the stun synergies. Okay, so let's do some rotations. Let's just do the shouts, and then attack, and then whirlwind. We can see our fortify meter kind of building slow. Okay, let's do a charge into whirlwind. And then Wrath of the Berserker, lunge into whirlwind. And then we can, like, refresh. Right? So the ticks are kind of all over the place, but I would say on average it's like 500,000 to 600,000 for each tick of whirlwind. That's a critical strike. We want to get the critical strike chance up so that they're all critical strikes for the most part, right? Every gray number is not even that small, right? There's still... yeah, even the gray numbers are still in the hundreds of thousands. So it's not too bad to not hit the critical strikes, but yeah, the build is very straightforward. So In our previous iteration, we were basically leaning on Lunging Strike and Expectant. And then now that we have Tybalt's Will, we can switch the focus into Sources of Unstoppable, which are topping off our Fury tremendously. And then we can still keep Lunging Strike for the utility that it provides, either giving Berserking by itself, giving us a movement option, giving us something to do if everything is on cooldown and we have no Fury, and then also don't want to lose the synergy with Wrath of the Berserker, where it extends Berserking, right? So there's our Berserk meter. Extend. Extend. All right, so we just keep on refreshing it. As long as that green bar was active under Wrath of the Berserker, it's a guaranteed refresh. But then also just on Critical Strike, it can potentially refresh. So that's just a solid refresh of Berserking while we're just moving around. And then Whirlwind itself, with Relentless Berserker, can refresh that same purple Berserking meter, right? And then we're running out of Fury, top off with our Shouts. While our Shouts are active, we have good Fury regeneration. Okay, and then now we've got nothing, so let's charge, and we're right back into it. And now we've got options. We can go Wrath of the Berserker. We can boost with the Shouts. As long as the Shouts are active, our Fury is topped off. Now our Fury is slowly going down. We're going to have no way to refresh it other than charge. Looks like we got a lucky hit chance there. Charge. Yeah. So it's basically perma-whirlwinding, and we're just managing our three options, right? So let's treat Rallying Cry and War Cry as one button going forward, and that's one source of Unstoppable and Berserking. Charge is another source of Unstoppable and Berserking, and Wrath of the Berserker is another source of Unstoppable and Berserking. And all of those things, either they all give us Fury when we do that, and then they all give us Berserking, which activates Prolific Fury, and then Rallying Cry and Wrath of the Berserker itself has built-in resource generation. So yeah, it's a very synergistic build. It's not the best Barbarian build. It's a B tier build. There's a lot of S tier Barbarian builds that do a lot more damage. For me, I like the Whirlwind playstyle. I just want to be getting the most out of Whirlwind. I don't really care how Whirlwind does comparatively to other builds. What I'm trying to do is build the best Whirlwind build possible using maxroll as a reference, and then kind of making little tweaks and adjustments to suit my playstyle. So this is the wrap-up of our Eternal Realm Barbarian videos. What we're going to do is we're going to make two more, basically. We're going to do one video that's about pushing Nightmare Dungeons and another that's about farming all of the open world activities to gather up all of the different boss materials, right? So the end game, in our opinion, right now in this version of the game prior to Season 4 is basically split into two things. Like, take Whispers and Hell Tides and Legion events and world bosses, club all that into a singular activity, including the PvP arena, the Fields of Ruin, because those have Whispers associated with them as well. Club all of that into open world farming, right? And it's nice that the Whispers finally have a use with the Varshan materials, because that takes us to other parts of the map, and it's nice to re-explore those events that we wouldn't normally go to if we were just farming Helltides, right? So there's open world material farming, which is very reminiscent of the bounty system in Diablo 3, and then there's Nightmare Dungeons, which is kind of like the Greater Rifts, where we're leveling glyphs instead of leveling gems. And then in Season 4, they're going to add the Pit, which is really more like the Greater Rift system, where the loot only drops at the very end. So right now we've got Nightmare Dungeons and open world material farming, and then in Season 4 it's going to add the Pit, which is more like Greater Rifts, and that's basically all of the endgame activities in Diablo. The open world farming leads you to the Duriel boss fight, which is where you're farming for your Uber uniques, and then everything else is just like Nightmare Dungeons, just leveling glyphs, right? All open world farming is just a means to an end to fight Duriel. So, yeah, I would say that this version of Diablo 4 is pretty close to being good. It's got kind of two major issues. One is that codex rework right now would be really good. If we just got that codex rework, that would be a huge plus. And then the other is just like, if I just look at the affixes, right, and look at like how the chest is, like if you just took all of these offensive properties off of the chest, right, like if you just curated the gear a little bit and tried to get all of the gear kind of closer to 25 total affixes in the pool, cap the re-rolling cost to like, I don't know, 5 million or something, 2 million, 5 million. I re-rolled total armor on this chest. The final roll to get this total armor was a 12 million gold roll to roll for total armor. So like, fix the stash, put all this shit on the codex, reduce the amount of affixes on gear, and cap the re-rolling cost. And that's basically what they are doing in Season 4. Plus they're adding crafting, so they're kind of going too far, I think, in terms of simplifying the gear affixes, but whatever. They simplify the gear affixes, gear is better. You can do the tempering to pick affixes, and then it's all about finding gear with greater affixes, which is going to be max rolled, and then master working them to juice the rolls that you want on gear, right? And all of the builds are going to change. The builds are all going to be based on the tempering recipes now, and it's going to be easier to swap in and out of builds with the way the codex is changing, where when we salvage, the legendary power goes directly into the codex, and we can, if we get a max roll legendary power and we salvage it, we'll have a max roll legendary power in the codex. So it's going to be a lot easier to switch in and out of builds. You can kind of keep how I keep my stash organized. I've got aspects, weapons, armor, jewelry, and uniques, which just leaves me one stash as storage for my rogue. It's going to be nice when all of these aspects go away and go into the codex, and then we won't have to keep unextracted aspects as well. And then we won't have to keep any yellows, so like our inventory problems are going to be solved for the most part. The gear fix problems, I think, are kind of like oversolved for. I like some complexity in the gear fixes, but the complexity is now going to be in tempering and finding the crafting manuals. So, yeah. Overall, I would say this version of the game is like good with the two endgame activities, the open world farming and the nightmare dungeons. And then the game should get better with the third activity, the pit. And then the way that you'll have a little bit more control over your gear. It'll be easier to set up builds and experiment a little bit. You can change your aspects easier, and you can change your affixes easier with tempering and rerolling. So, awesome. It took a couple of takes to put this video together, and in the prior takes, I don't think I covered all of the different topics that I wanted to get to. It was really important for me to go over how my skill bar is set up, how all of those synergies work, and then all of the different stuff on my critical chance spreadsheet, the critical strike chance, the max fury, and the resource generation. So, yeah, hope you guys enjoyed watching. This is more of a build overview, and then in the final two videos, we're going to do some nightmare dungeon pushing, and then we'll do one big video where we're going to farm the entire open world D3 bounty style in one go and see how many Duriel runs we get out of that. So looking forward to that one. Hope you guys enjoy that final video. And yeah, take care. Thanks a lot.